What's up, bro?
What, bro?
What's up, bro?
Take a swing, bro.
Right here, bro.
Why you gotta disrespect, bro?
I do respect you, bro.
Show some respect, bro.
I do respect you, bro.
Stop disrespecting, bro.
I respect you, bro.
Okay, I respect you too.
Okay.
The bro down is over. Let's bro out.
Well, welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. I'm Andy. I'm here with my co-host, Anthony, Cube Menage a Trois participant Maddox.
So it was a little bit of a journey to figure out what I did this week that, gave me such a nickname, and I can't figure out what happened.
You let me put 10 cards in your cube. Scandalous.
Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't think that was that scandalous. That was more like, I don't know, trading underwear or something.
That's less scandalous to you? Whatever.
You made a guest update to my regular cube.
It would have been easier to give me a nickname than you a nickname this week, but that's not how this works. I give you a nickname.
Oh, what did you participate in?
No, I would have said, guest cube curator or something.
Sure.
What are you, like the guestee, a host cube curator? But cube host means, look.
Cube victim.
Well, you weren't a victim. You needed to get to the context. The weekly cube night.
Glad we've already gotten into context matters.
The weekly cube night at our local game store has gotten larger and larger as time goes on, and we had enough people that we were concerned we were going to need a 10-person pod of the regular cube, and we didn't end up needing that, and so you were a few cards short because you notoriously don't have a fixed set of cards in the regular cube.
Yeah, it's just like once you're above, I want it to be a little bit more than the minimum size needed just for the draft pool, just for a little bit of variation. More importantly, it just makes it easy to update, and I already don't update it as often as I should, so I'm glad that I make it even easier for myself because I don't have to find a matching cut for every ad. I can just sort of add something in if I think it's cool or cut something if I think it's not cool. But where I've ended up lately, it was just really close to 450 cards, and the context really does matter. In this case, the context of we're just playing with a bigger, more consistent group, and that group is different sizes every week, so, sometimes, ideally, we've had as many as 16 people, and we can do 2 full 8 pods, or we've split it up 6 and 6, but just
8 and 6
having
or something.
one cube that can accommodate up to 10 just gives us a little more flexibility. So, yeah, I mean, that's not something I ever would have thought is like a flexibility that's really important for this cube, but it turns out that, now we're there. So
yeah, exactly. Because 10 is a pretty cursed number if you have 2 360 card cubes.
Yeah,
because you have to do 6 and 4 or 8 and 2 or something. But whatever you want to do, it's not going to be as good as 8s and 6s, which is what you want things to be a combination of. I thought the 10-person draft was fine.
I think the 10-person pod went great. It is a little bit different, and honestly, just the round pairings being a little bit more difficult is maybe the biggest downside, but...
We got lucky there, though, because we actually didn't have 3 2-0s, which is possible with a 10-person pod. So we did actually have a real 3 rounds with one decisive winner decided.
I got to first pick Soul Herder, which I think... Okay, so maybe I should have quizzed you on this, because I said it was a card that you maybe are getting tired of, in the little table talk as we're doing the draft, and should have quizzed you on what you would have guessed, but...
I wouldn't have guessed Soul Herder.
You wouldn't have guessed Soul Herder? Okay.
I'm not tired of it. I'm off it.
You just never
in
liked
terms
it to
of
begin
power
with?
level. No, it's not that I dislike it. I just don't think it's very good. I used to think it was pretty good in your cube, and then now I don't think it's that great anymore.
I'm still pretty high on it, and so I first picked it in a pretty powerful pack with a bunch of great options, but then it really felt like those colors were not open, and green was really open, so switched into sort of a mostly green, pretty aggressive deck, which went okay.
I feel like green is often open in the regular cube.
It is, yeah. Although, I played the other green player the first round, and his deck also seemed very strong, and I lost handily.
Yeah, but none of those green decks made it to the final.
True.
The final 2-0 bracket.
Yeah.
It was all black decks.
Cube design's hard, and black decks are good.
Yep. It's James and I have an ongoing argument whether or not black, white, or black, red is the best in the cube, and those were the 2 decks in the finals last night, and last night black, white won, so I had to check in the James's right column, but I think next time maybe I'll get the win.
So what'd you think of your guest edit?
It was interesting. I actually wish I had remembered I was going to do that right before, because I remembered with 5 minutes before I was about to leave.
Okay, so this is more of a guest scramble.
I have a lot of stacks of cards around, as you can see.
I can see that,
sitting here in my Magic studio.
Let's count them.
No, it's not, actually. And so there's cards around it and have to go digging to find cards. And I would say I was really happy with half of the cards I added.
Okay.
And the other ones, I ended up bringing, I wasn't looking at the list when I pulled the cards out. I ended up bringing 4 cards you already had in the cube that I was like, I don't think this is in there, but it actually was.
In a way, really dialed in this sort of uncanny valley of dialed in to what this cube is all about.
Uncanny Valley, I think I'm just dialed in normally.
Well, if you were really dialed in, you would know that things were in the list.
Oh, sure, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Point is, I think I did it in good faith. Only one card was a little bit of a troll, and that was Chatterstorm. But it was a troll in the sense that I think it could be
okay.
good.
Yeah.
It's
medium.
It's a troll in the sense that I know you would never put it in the cube because it's got Storm, and I don't think you'd ever put a Storm card in the regular cube.
But it also has squirrels. Every choice is sort of a vector sum, and Storm is a negative vector. Squirrels is a big positive vector, so here we are.
Who's to say? That one was a little bit of a troll, but I'm really...
To be fair, I'm also pretty into the idea of, Fair Storm. I've tried to make that work in the irregular
aren't we all?
cube.
Look, we're all in love with Fair Storm. It just never works.
The idea of, can I not, do a huge, weird, complicated, nonlinear combo that no one understands and doesn't really work that well, and even when it does, no one enjoys playing with it? Not so much. The idea of, I'm going to have that one cool turn where I'm going to sequence things just right, and I, kick something off suspend, and I end up getting 8 goblins. That's cool.
Basically, just that one pair of dual decks where the one has a bunch of suspend cards and empty the Warrens. That's what you're talking about.
That wasn't even that fun. It was really hard to make those decks work.
See, I think those decks are pretty fun, and that was my past attempts at trying to make Fair Storm work in a cube environment were modeled around that, and it's really hard to draft a deck like that, it turns out. So just got to make our own dual decks.
You got to make so you have your intro decks.
Yep.
You need your next level intro decks and have one of them be Fair Storm. Is this already part of your plan? Is that already on the list?
I will not lie. I have thought about making intermediate decks for every color pair. Mm-hmm. But it was hard enough to make the monocolor decks, and I think that would be an enormous, enormous project that I would almost not be able to handle alone. Look how much testing you have to do to figure out if 10 decks are reasonably form a reasonable meta against each other. Even 5 is really hard. It's already 10 matchups. 10 decks is some number of more matchups. How many matchups are there with 10 decks?
Look, like you said yesterday, I'm good at math. I'm not good at arithmetic. I could write I could tell you later when I'm doing a computer.
Anyway, we can't get too far down the rabbit hole, Anthony, because this is part 2 of our Brothers War. The Brothers' War. It's the Brothers' War, technically, right? Because it's S apostrophe, so it's the Brothers' War.
I don't think it's pronounced brothers.
Well, you put more zizzes on it.
I did my best.
You're saying it's pronounced just brothers, the same way that two people that are related by blood and identify as male would be.
Agree, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think you do that. You do a brothers'. Yeah, hi, future Andy. It's definitely not brothers'. The Brothers' War. This is part 2 of our set review for the Brothers' War. If you tuned in last week, you heard that we did our first impressions and evaluation of the mechanics and themes of the set from a game design perspective, absent any context or specific cube in mind. And this week we're talking about the cards we are interested in for our own cubes specifically. So not thinking about your environment, not thinking abstractly. You're the listener environment. You're obviously thinking about your environment, Anthony, because that's the whole point of the exercise. But we're not thinking abstractly. We are just talking about the cards we want to put in our own cubes and are interested in for those environments. And then it is going to be 2 weeks until our community set review episode. If you haven't filled out the survey on luckypaper.co/survey/bro, make sure you do that so that we know what you're testing in your different cubes and can get a full sampling of what the cube world is up to with regards to this new set. You have 3 environments that you have cards for, right? You have Turbo Cube, Regular Cube, and Battlebox, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the mono black cube has been taken apart, and the irregular cube is, let's say it's on the back burner a little bit. I need to sort of think about what's going on there.
I've also got a lot of back burner projects, so the only 2 cubes I'm updating are my Bun Magic Cube and the Degenerate Micro Cube. You've got 3, so why don't you pick one of those and go first, Anthony?
All right, well, let's start with the regular cube, which we were just talking about. So this is kind of a mid-power level cube. It plays a lot like a master set. It's very focused on creatures and simple cards that add a lot of complexity once you get them on the board together. The first thing I'm interested in here is Recruitment Officer. This is 1 white mana for a 2/1 human soldier, and it's got the activated ability 3 and a white to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order.
I'm surprised you're interested in this.
I'm a little bit surprised too. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm surprised because there is a panoply of white 1 mana 2/1s with various upside out there, none of which have ever, to my knowledge, been anywhere near your cube because you've traditionally eschewed this 1-drop aggro, and I think this upside's going to come up pretty rarely as well, just like a lot of the other 1 mana 2/1s with upside. So what is it about this one that draws you in more than an Usher of the Fallen or a...
So I think the late game relevance here is actually much higher than on something like Usher of the Fallen, because you don't need to get into combat. It's not going to just, make a soldier by slamming itself into a 4/4. The late game relevance is actually pretty meaningful here. You can repeatedly activate that. It is still sort of scaled the way that
Do you think you're going to win a game where you're repeatedly paying 4 mana to maybe draw a small creature?
Great question. I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical of this card as well, but I think of all of these sort of Savannah Lions with upside, this one seems like it does have a really meaningful interaction, especially in this environment where a lot of the ways that white decks are winning and finishing the game is with small flyers and evasive threats. I think that, just drawing that last flyer when your opponent's about to stabilize or has stabilized is really relevant. So I think the card selection is meaningful. I'm a little bit skeptical as well, but of all the cards here, this did just kind of stand out to me.
Interesting. They had to print a 2/1 eventually that would interest you for 1 white, so I guess this is the one for now. I will say that, you don't have the 1 mana 2/1 aggro deck that a lot of cubes tend to feature in your cube, but I was playing last night against a black-red deck that had Gravecrawler in it, and Gravecrawler was in it largely because of Gravecrawler's text box.
Yeah,
I think you would still play Gravecrawler if it was a 1/1. You might still play Gravecrawler if it was a 0/2 for all I know. I'm not sure about that, but...
A 0/2 that can't block. I mean, honestly, yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, because really what it does in this environment is it's like, turn anything that says sacrifice a creature into pay 1 black, right? That's pretty much what it does. You got to build around it a little bit to have a zombie in play, but it translates all of those activated abilities to just cost a black mana. So that's why it's in here. But I happen to have a couple games where my opponent just turned 1 to Gravecrawler, and I'm like, well... my deck's not built to beat a turn 1 2/1 because that's not a thing that happens in this environment with any regularity, and it was a problem. So I could definitely see certain decks where you're just going to have Recruitment Officer in your opening hand, and even if the late game relevance doesn't come up, you're just going to have a game where you get to deal a lot of damage before your opponent gets to stabilize.
Yeah, I mean, that's relevant context as well, that the cube has, since its inception, skewed lower curving and more aggressive, having more cheap proactive things. So that's definitely a part of my change of mind here as well. I mean, I don't think that Savannah Lions would be very good in this environment. Do you disagree?
No, I think because you don't have the density and it's such a bad top deck, it'll still be good the games you have it on turn 1, right?
Sure, yeah.
I think that's the thing that some people might not make that connection, that it's still good even if it's an environment where you're not going to be able to follow it up with 2 more 1-drops of next turn. It's still good to have a 1 mana 2/1, especially on the play. And that was the situation I was in. It's like, oh, cool, I have my hand with my 3 mana removal spell, and it's like, that's pretty normal for this environment. It's like a 3 mana removal spell, but my opponent was on the play and played a Gravecrawler, and it's like, I'll be taking 6 from that, and then maybe spending my 3 mana to remove the 1-drop, and that's going to happen sometimes with these aggressive, high-powered creatures.
For sure.
Would you still play this if it was a 1/2, out of curiosity?
Great question. I definitely
I'm trying
like
to really
skew...
investigate the details of your affection for this card.
I wouldn't say affection, curiosity.
Curiosity, okay.
It's
You're a little recruitment curious?
Sure. I don't know. I mean, I definitely try to skew things more aggressive just in terms of the power toughness as well, just because it is... At this lower power level context, it is easy to create games that can lead to big board stalls. So I'd be less interested in that, especially because there are a lot of 1/1 tokens, and just blanking a bunch of those tokens wouldn't really lend itself to the kinds of play patterns I'm interested in as much.
Since we're talking about it now, Recruitment Officer is in my honorable mentions for the Bun Magic Cube. I'm not sure I'm actually going to put it in for testing. I think, especially in my environment, how many games you're going to win where you're paying 4 mana to draw a cheap creature.
I think that effect really is
almost
expensive.
None, and so it'll come up sometimes, but if a thing comes up but it still doesn't change the outcome of the game, did it really matter? And so I think this is one of the better 1 mana, white 2/1s with upside we've ever seen, but I'm on very few of those in my cube these days, and so I don't think it's as good as Kythian, which is probably the best one in my mind. It's probably not as good as Usher of the Fallen either, and then maybe it's a third best, but I'm not even sure I'm on a third Savannah Lions variant. I have to check my list, which I can do right now. Give me a sec. Dauntless Bodyguard. That's the other one that I think I actually do really... I like that one quite a bit.
That one's pretty cool.
It's clean. It's got a flavorful name. The whole package works really nicely. So yeah, I don't know. It's like it's gonna have to displace one of those 3 for me. Those are the only 3 1 mana 2/1s I'm on, and I don't think it does it. So I can see why a lot of people are gonna like it. I expect this to perform well on the community survey, but that's 2 weeks from now episode. We're not talking about that tonight.
Something else that I think is interesting about this, and I think interesting about the set as a whole and how it translates when you start applying cards to a specific context is, like we mentioned, there are a lot of cards that have super expensive activated abilities because of the power stones in the environment, which when I'm taking, 4 or 5 cards from the set and putting them into my cube, all those effects basically just get a lot more expensive than they would have been in this set. And I think if similar these cards are printed in a set without Power Stones, they would have just scaled those activated abilities. So there are a lot of cards that I looked at and I'm like, this is a cool design, but because this costs 6 instead of 4 or 3, it's just not something that's going to play in a meaningful way in this cube.
I don't even know if it's overcosted. Like, I think costing that ability much lower, and it does start to become kind of nuts.
I think that this is an example where it's like, this one is reasonable, but there are a
Right.
ton of other cards that just have really, really pricey activated abilities.
Like, a similar card that I think I like a lot more, just from a power level perspective, is Duskwatch Recruiter, which I don't play because of the backside and because you often don't want it to flip and then it does, and that's just annoying and it's complicated for dumb reasons. But if there was a card that was basically just the front side Duskwatch Recruiter, I'd be pretty interested in it. And I think the fact that its activated ability is 1 cheaper, I believe, is a pretty big deal.
All right, this next card I'm much more excited about. I think this is one that's going to be a great fit and stick around for a long time. This is Thopter Mechanic, which is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Human Artificer, and it has whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a 1/1 counter on Thopter Mechanic, and when it dies, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying.
This seems like a slam dunk regular cube card.
Perfect. It's so regular.
You're still on the fairy that gets bigger when you draw
Fairy
a second
Vandal,
card. I always forget which one it is. And this, I think, is like a cool side grade to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably, in a lot of situations, going to be worse. Flying's a really good keyword.
It also, Fairy Vandal also has Flash, which is pretty relevant.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I find myself main phasing a lot of Fairy Vandals, so I can immediately put a counter on it when I play with it.
True.
So I'm not sure how much that is super relevant, but it's a cool side grade, and it's cool that this will give you that reward for drawing a second card a turn, which we've talked before about how nice it is to reward people for doing a thing they already want to be doing, and also like maybe touch a little bit on your Artifact Matters deck, which is a theme you have kind of going on here. So I think it's a great fit.
Yeah, I mean, it rewards you for what you want to be doing already, but critically, I feel like it's not totally free. Like, it does influence your sequencing decisions a little bit. You do end up, main phasing your cantrips and things like that when you wouldn't want to, and also sometimes, spreading out those cantrips across multiple turns in a different way to get multiple different triggers. So yeah, I love those mechanics. I love that this leaves you something a little bit behind, even though it might become a big threat, but then you get something a little bit more evasive. I think there's just going to be a lot of interesting stuff it can do. And, maybe some blue-black decks can even take advantage of the fact that this is just multiple bodies that they can sacrifice.
I feel like decks are always finding a way to sacrifice things in your cube for value, so I think that'll definitely happen. I definitely do like this kind of effect more in a proactive deck, because if I want to hold up my mana, then I'm not going to want to be main phasing those cantrips or cycling cards main phase or whatever to proc the Thopter Mechanic. But in a deck that is more proactive, like a blue-red spells deck or something, I really like this kind of effect for sure.
All right, next up, I have a card that I immediately loved when I saw it, and it's one of these colored unearthed cards that a lot of people guessed correctly that we hinted at last week. Did you want to venture a guess?
Well, so all of the votes we got were either for Combat Courier or the Scuttle Mutt. What's the name of the Scuttle Mutt card? Scrapwork Mutt.
Someone also suggested it might be Mishra's, what is it called? Mishra's Desk?
Yeah, that one's definitely not
silly.
it. I think between those two, it's got to be one of those two, and I think it's going to be the Courier that you like.
Really?
The most.
Nope, it's definitely the dog.
Okay,
I
darn.
love Scrapwork Mutt so much. So this is 2 generic mana for a 2/1 artifact creature dog. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card and draw a card, and it has Unearth for 1 and a red. I think this card's just fantastic. I honestly really just love a 2-1 rummaging card. I feel like that just, I don't know, it's aesthetically like a
There's
set
a lot of those out there at Common and Magic's history.
They're not quite relevant enough in this environment. I think that people just wouldn't play it. I think it's Emberstorm Predator. So making this a little bit more flexible on the mana cost and giving it Unearth on that rummage, meaning that later in the game you get your second rummage, I think is just so cool, especially just in the way that it shapes your hand. If you draw a kind of shaky hand, but you have this, you don't even necessarily have to have red mana in your hand to begin with, knowing that you're going to get 1, and if you do get that red mana, potentially 2 loots out of it, or 2 rummages, is pretty cool and exciting, plus all of the other interactions it can have with just sacrifice and entering and leaving the battlefield, and discard matters and draw matters and artifacts matter, and it's a cool dog in the end.
It fits.
Okay,
it definitely fits
great.
with everything you're doing in the cube, for
Have
sure.
I convinced you that I like it?
Of course, yeah. I love that you get really excited about cards that, like, ultimately this is probably like in the bottom 40% of the cards in the regular cube on power level. Like, this is not going to be a high pick, right?
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's going to be very medium.
Yeah. But I like that you get excited about that, though. It fills this role that is not just a new powerful thing for you to be doing. It's this like slot that you weren't totally happy with all the options you had before. You wanted this kind of effect, but couldn't justify putting Fissure Wizard in or whatever the, random 2-1 with a Rummage staple to it is. So the fact that you get one now that does have enough upside for you to be excited about it, it's a beautiful little piece to slot into the puzzle that is the regular cube. The beautiful puzzle.
Yeah, the one problem is I'm learning a lot about my own taste in Magic and how it might be evolving through this cube, and I'm just a little too stacked on that kind of effect, and these kind of red, black, white, black sacrifice decks are a little too pushed right now, so I'm probably going to have to make some hard decisions and find a couple things to cut.
I can help with that if you'd
I know,
like.
you're gonna cut Hobble Fiend immediately, and it's going to make me sad.
Hobble Fiend, out of here. 3 other red 2-drops that care about sacrificing things, all out of here. There's like 50 of them.
Dismissive Pyromancer, come back.
That one I would be more likely to
Okay.
keep.
Okay.
Probably.
All right, in a pretty similar vein in terms of like effects that I'm interested in, but are maybe historically not quite impactful enough, but is kind of an interesting twist that Wizards has been pushing in this direction. I really am curious about Bushwhack. This is a sorcery for 1 green. It has choose 1, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle, obviously. Or target creature fights target creature you don't control. Sorry.
Target creature
Or
you control.
target creature
You can't just make
control
your
fights-
opponent's 2 creatures fight each
put
other. That would be
in,
so
You
good.
gotta pay 5 mana in red for that sometimes. So I'm generally not a huge fan of modal cards that just have no resonance to them. It's just like, hey, get one of these 2 totally different effects, just kind of aesthetically.
I am a fan of them, I'll say, just to be the counterpoint.
Yeah, I mean, but again, even if that's a small, like that's a tick in the negative box, the fact that I think this is just a really effective way to get fight spells into people's decks, I think is pretty cool. I don't know.
You say it's an
exciting
effective way to
actually
get
gonna
fight
be.
spells into people's decks. People have to take it and play it in their deck before it
We'll see.
succeeds at that goal.
So this is a little bit speculative, but I think that recently having seen how Tailswipe performed in the last couple drafts, I think that was a card that I was a little bit impressed by, and people have actually been putting in their decks.
I think Tailswipe is a
quite a bit
substantially better than this.
Fair, fair. So yeah, I mean, this isn't definitely a slam dunk that I think is going to be there forever, but I like seeing more cheap and slightly more flexible fight spells, because the floor on fight spells really, really is low.
Yes.
Which is why I think that modality is pretty cool and relevant.
I agree. I like that. I think the deal with this modality is that there's also a lot of points in the game where the other motive is also not going to be relevant.
That's
right?
true, yeah.
Like if you're just top decking with a bad board state, you're like, well, this does neither of the things that I want to do. Like if there was a fight spell with just cycling, maybe there is. I don't think there is.
There's gotta be.
If there was a decently costed fight spell with just cycling, I would be like really into that as far as fight spells are concerned, because you can just recycle it if you need something else and you don't have a good fight target on the battlefield. I don't know. I think people are probably not going to be drawn to this. I've been really impressed with how relevant the +1/+1 when you main phase tail swipe is.
Yeah, that's really true.
I find that that card's really elegant because I find that most of the time I do want to be main phasing my fight spells. Most of the time.
Right. I mean, they are risky, so you want to do it often when your opponent's tapped out anyway.
Right. So if they're tapped out, I'm not going to let them untap and then like do it on their end step and hope they tap out again. But also, I find that I'm usually in a proactive deck, and I also just want to clear a blocker and get an attack in.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a great
waiting
point.
to attack. So the fact that like that's Tailswipe's main mode, but also if someone like points a removal spell at something or whatever, you can in a pinch like take something else out as well or do something. It's really nice. Tailswipe is been pretty impressive, and I think is a really good power level for the regular cube. I'm not as convinced in Bushwhack. The +1/+1 is really relevant, I think, because if the turns of the game you want it to matter, like you're so often just going to trade with the fight spell, and that's not good, right? If you're using your fight spell to make it to a bad bone shards, that's really not where you want to be. Get bone shards is good when you sacrifice something really tiny to get rid of something valuable, which you can't really do with the 1-for-1 fight spell. So you really got to be winning those fights, and in the early game, that +1/+1 makes you win a fight that you very often would have lost. So I'll be curious to see if people put Bushwhack in their deck.
Yeah, that's the real question is, will people play it at all? All right, so the last one is also very speculative, but it sort of just was a little interesting to me, and so I'm curious about your take on it. It's Legions to Ashes. This is 1 white-black. For sorcery, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls, and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. Very early in this cube's history, I had a couple, Putrefy and Mortify, these gold removal spells, and pretty quickly I sort of realized that I wanted to spend the sort of amount of the gold card equity on things that were a little splashier, a little bit more interesting than just removal spells. But the fact that there are a lot of tokens in this environment and this exiles things permanently, I think both those aspects actually make this a very relevant and appealing removal spell, specifically in this context.
The exile really matters in this environment.
It really does.
I think some of the best decks are abusing the graveyard.
And abusing tokens.
I have been really impressed in this environment with how relevant the exile on Lava Coil is. I mean, Lava Coil is just a well-costed removal spell in this environment whenever, but there are so many times where I'm like, thank God this has exile, because otherwise I would just be turning this removal spell into a little speed bump, but now I can actually remove the thing. So the fact that it exiles, this would definitely see play. I think this is for sure powerful enough to get drafted and get put in people's decks.
Is it cool and fun, though?
I mean, my honest answer is no, I don't think it's cool and fun, but I don't know.
Maybe good for the environment?
I don't know. I don't know if it's good for the environment, I guess, is the question I'm trying to answer. I think there's this interesting tension, which we don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole because we can't spend this entire episode talking about the regular cube, though maybe we will next week between part 2 and part 3 of our set reviews. I think there's this interesting tension right now in terms of what kinds of threats are good against removal and what kinds of threats are not good against removal in the regular cube. And I don't know how this kind of fits into that matrix. We'll just tease it.
Okay.
Maybe we'll talk more about that next week. We'll see.
Yeah, I think the result of thinking about this card a little bit is I might end up just including things like Bile Blight or some other effects
I was going to ask about a Bile
interact
Blight.
with tokens and things like that.
Or an
I do
Echoing
like
Truth.
the sort of modality here, which just the way the card is worded is interesting, that they don't just say exile something and all other things that share the same name. It's very explicitly only you can hit a bunch of tokens, or I guess in the weird cases hit some copies, or one permanent. So they're really kind of expressing the modality in interesting ways.
I feel like that's for all of the commander decks
to
these
let
days
people
that
know,
have
like,
copies.
hey, this is still relevant to your environment. Oh no, you think
No. I don't think it's to inform dense commander players that it works for tokens.
Exist in
No,
their
I think it's
environment.
because there's like a whole category of EDH decks now that are all about just making tons of copies of things, and it would be kind of a feel bad if you were just like, haha, 3 mana, I get rid of your deck that's built around having 9 of your commander in play.
But if it just said like Bile Blight, like exile a creature, and all things that have the same name, that would still work. It would obviously hit duplicates in formats where you have.
No, but that's my point. I'm saying I don't think they want it to hit like a clone that you played that copied something, because there are decks that are built around playing a bunch of clones to clone a thing a bunch of times.
Oh, because
they're not tokens.
Well, but still say that player controls.
That's what I'm talking about, though.
There's a lot of questions
Who knows?
about the details of every single word on this card, and I think we'll just have to save that for another time. So that's the regular cube. Not as many updates as I expected. You know, we talked about
You were very
a lot
high
of
on this
the
set,
mechanics. You know, we talked about Power Stones and how there's a lot of play there, and the prototype being a very cool mechanic, but it does ultimately just come down to individual cards. It also comes down to like what you're looking for in a particular environment. So even though I think there is a lot of depth with things like Power Stones, I wasn't really into putting just like a card that makes a Power Stone in this context, because it doesn't really fulfill the same role. So I think what might happen is I just have to build another cube that can lean more into this set.
I'm in a kind of similar spot with the Bud Magic Cube. There are not very many cards I'm interested in. I think part of it is that this is a set that's largely about artifacts, and I don't have any semblance of an artifact theme in the Bud Magic Cube right now. When I see artifact type lines, the only thing I think about is turning on Delirium, and that's where I'm at with this cube. Like, I have really nothing else that cares about them at all. It's not nothing, but I know a lot of other cube designers do have artifact themes, and so me without that makes me look at this set with a different perspective. And so really there are only 4 cards that I expect to like actively test, but I do want to mention a couple honorable mentions up first. We talked about Recruitment Officer really quickly. Lay Down Arms is a card that definitely piqued my interest. This is the 1 white mana sorcery that says exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. I love these kind of small scalable removal spells, but I saw this and I was like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. Then I was like, wait, I'm not playing Defile. And Defile, the Modern Horizons card that gives something -1/-1 for each swamp you control for 1 black mana, I believe in instant speed, seems just better than this. I mean, there's definitely some cards that are going to have higher toughness than mana value, but there's also plenty of cards in my cube that are the opposite. They have higher mana value than toughness. So ultimately, I think that even though I have typed dual lands, I have a bunch of shock lands in my environment, so you can have a bunch of planes even in a multicolored deck. I don't think this is going to quite get there for me. Yeah,
the duels is interesting. I feel like in a lot of contexts, this would just be sort of pushing players to play fewer colors, sort of focus on mono white. So I could definitely see in contexts like that. But I agree. I think there are probably just more effective removal spells. Like I feel like this might just feel a little bit too random, specifically in your cube.
The argument for, I think, why it might be potentially better than Defile is just that there is a mono white deck in my cube, and there is not a mono black deck in my cube, and so the mono white deck, I think, would be pretty happy to play this because it's going to scale up much more linearly as the game goes, whereas your Defile does, I think, kind of fall off as you get to your 5th and 6th lands. It's hard to have that density of swamps.
I mean, it's also a huge difference that Defile is an instant.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's probably worse than Defile. I'm not on Defile, and so even though the color difference does mean something, I'm not going to try Lay Down Arms, I don't think. 2 more quick honorable mentions. Misery's Shadow is 1 and a black for a 2/2 creature shade, and it says, if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, and it has an activated ability for 1 generic mana. Misery's Shadow gets +1/+1 till end of turn. I think this is a really pushed, really clean card that would totally hang on power level in the Bun Magic Cube. Nantuko Shade is at home in shambles over Misery's Shadow. The only thing I'm skeptical of here is I just don't love the kind of freebie hate effects, I think. You know, I remember thinking back to the brief period of time where I had Dalthy Voidwalker in my cube and just exiling everything kind of for free on a creature you already wanted to play just kind of felt bad. It was like you didn't have to actually plan around it. You just kind of got it for free. And there's not a problem in my cube with decks abusing this kind of effect, right? Like, I think in your cube, that's a thing you would genuinely hate draft against. You're like, I need an answer to like recursive creatures because it's such a huge part of what your cube does. It's not a big part of what my cube does. So when it just randomly turns off like your 1 unearth or something, it's just like, ugh, well, really? Okay, great. So that's what I think is going to keep me from trying out Misery Shadow. It's also not the most exciting card in the world, but it is clean, and I think it's quite powerful. I mean, this is a great example of the whole threat of activation thing, right? Like, you play no spells first main phase, you attack with 3 mana up. Like, How are they going to block this thing? They're probably not going to be able to profitably.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting card because it looks in a lot of ways like a classic old school Magic card, even down to the illustration in a big, big way. I think that so many of the illustrations in this set call back to old Magic in a sort of callbacky way. This kind of just looks like an old card in a certain degree, to a certain degree. But what doesn't look like an old card about it is just the numbers and stat line. It's like, oh wait, this isn't like a 4 mana 2/2 that you pump for 1 and a black and it deals 1 damage to you. It's just a 2 mana 2/2. It costs generic mana to pump. It pumps power and toughness. And it has this extra hate ability. I think, like you say, it's sort of like, oh, there's this weird little shadow here, but it's just going to be unblockable, and then it's going to be the Abyss. Like, I think this is going to be, in a lot of contexts, a pretty oppressive card in a way that maybe isn't that fun.
Yeah. So it definitely caught my eye, but I don't think I'm going to get around to finding space for it because I'm too in love with the other things my black section is doing. I want to just briefly call out Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, only because I think there's a potential future where I start running this card. It's 3 blue for a legendary Planeswalker Teferi. It enters the battlefield with 4 loyalty, and whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty counter on Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. It has a 0 loyalty ability to draw a card and a -2 loyalty ability to make a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It's a card draw matters card, and it makes, I think, very scary tokens. I think that the token this thing makes is among the best tokens that a Planeswalker makes at any mana value, basically. It's really scary to have this giant creature that, I don't think I said it, but it also has vigilance. I think I missed that word when I was reading it. So it's this creature that just grows out of control. Obviously, it's just totally broken with like brainstorm effects where you just get to make your Teferi huge, make your token huge. I think this card is going to be a very fast control finisher. And something I have been not in love with lately in my cube is specifically the 5 mana Teferi from original Dominaria, just because it is a control finisher, but it's not that fast. It's so slow. It drags out the game so much. And I feel like any game, I'm talking myself into it. I'm going to test this card.
All right, great.
I think it is going to fill a very similar role to the 5 mana Teferi in blue-white that I'm currently on, but it's actually going to close out games. I don't love that it is so non-interactive. Like, it doesn't do anything to your opponent's stuff. It just presents a big board, and the things have vigilance, so you can attack for free without having to worry about protecting your Planeswalker. We'll see if I end up being happy with a just 5 mana pure threat in blue, but I think this is a very good one in terms of 5 mana pure threats in blue.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm really excited to see how this plays. To me, I think it feels very flavorful in that the mechanics feel like Teferi's ability of like moving quickly through time and manipulating time magic, where it's like the more time I'm doing, the more I'm digging through my library, the more both Teferi and the spirit he's bringing along with him are just going to grow and accelerate.
I also really love that Teferi and the token grow in the exact same way.
Yeah.
So it's like just tick them both up. It's a different kind of counter, but they just keep growing in the same way, which I think is really going to make it very easy to keep track of. Well, but otherwise be a pretty complicated set of rule sets. It's got a lot of text on it.
Right.
I didn't even read the ultimate. It's got an ultimate. It's good.
It sounds very good, yeah.
It's -12, so you got to get... It's going to take you a while to get there, but... well, I mean, maybe not even. You get a Sylvan Library and a Brainstorm. You're basically there in 2 turns.
Which I think is cool. I think the fact that it's going to have pretty varied play patterns and different kinds
It
of
does
decks.
have build-around potential.
You can build around it. You can just, like, play it and immediately just start drawing 2 cards a turn and gaining 2 loyalty a turn. Or, just building up threats. But I could see you getting up to that ultimate pretty quickly if you work for it.
Are you really just not going to make more tokens, though? Like, if you're drawing cards with Teferi, are you not just going to keep spitting out tokens that continue to scale out of control? I think I'm making tokens, probably.
Classic choice. Make tokens, win the game.
All right. So that's Teferi. Yeah, I've talked myself into it, so I'm going to move him out of honorable mentions into the actual testing list, just because I do think the card is exciting. It's kind of new. I just don't know how much I'm going to be in love with a 5-mana threat in blue, because I think it's going to fit in kind of a narrow range of decks. So that's that. My last card I want to mention briefly is Goblin Blastrunner. This is a common. It is 1 red mana for a creature goblin. It's a 1/2, and it gets +2/+0 and has menace as long as you've sacrificed a permanent this turn. I half thought maybe you would mention this card for the regular cube.
I definitely looked at it.
The obvious sort of synergy in the Bun Magic cube here is just with fetch lands. If you have fetch lands for a few turns, you played a 1-mana 3/2 menace that, even if it only is a 3/2 menace twice,
that's a pretty efficient threat.
That's a really efficient threat, and then as the game goes on, it will give you certain situations where you'll have a stalled board, but you draw that last fetch land or whatever, and then you can't actually get attacks in because now it has menace. I think it's interesting in that it's an aggro 1-drop that I think pushes decks to be many-colored aggro as opposed to mono-colored aggro, because you want those fetch lands, and you're not going to play a lot of fetch lands in a mono-red deck. So I don't see this being very good in a mono-red deck. I think this is quite good.
I mean, or it's good in a red deck that's now prioritizing fetch lands.
Maybe, but I don't think you want to change the whole strategy of your deck to, like... I think part of what makes mono-red so good is that you don't have to spend picks on lands.
True, yeah.
Every other deck has to. You get to just take red cards out of every pack. So yeah, I think it pushes aggro decks to be many-colored, which is a cool thing for aggro cards to do. I don't actually know how good it is. I don't know how often you're going to be able to play this on turn 1 and then still have 2 fetch lands available to activate it twice or more, right? I don't know how good it is if you only get to turn it on once. Is that a good card? Probably not. I'm a notorious defender of 1-powered 1-drops in aggro decks because I do think a lot of decks just want warm bodies in play to crew vehicles, to put equipment on, to just do stuff with, and I think a lot of decks would actually be better off with more 1-powered 1-drops than the additional 2-drops and 3-drops they have in their aggro decks. So I don't think it's a total dud if you don't get to trigger it multiple times, but it just hasn't quite convinced me yet, I guess.
Yeah, I'm curious in your list specifically, there aren't a ton, I don't think, of other ways to sacrifice things. I think in some environments you're going to have like a bunch of treasures floating around. You do have things like Pyrite Spellbomb and Seal of Fire, so I think there are opportunities to trigger it, but maybe not as many in some environments.
There's going to be other ways, but mostly you're leaning on those 20 fetch lands in the cube, I think. Well, 21 if you include Prismatic Vista. So yeah, I don't know how great it would be in the cube. I'm very curious about it, but I don't know if I'm curious enough to find space for it. We'll see.
I mean, the big brain play is you play City of Traders and then ramp out something big, and then you play another land, sacrificing your City of Traders.
Yeah, buddy.
That's what you're looking for to finally make that relevant.
The classic City of Traders red 1-drop deck.
Yep. Yep. It's cool. I promise.
All right, thus end my honorable mentions. Those cards I'm not sure I'm going to find room for testing, though I have kind of talked myself into playing with Teferi, at least proxying Teferi and playing with a little bit to see how it feels. There's 4 cards I'm actually a little more excited about for my cube. But I gotta say, only 1 or maybe 2 of these are like cards I'm actually excited. I think I gave 2 of these cards over a 2 on the Lucky Paper survey. So, in order from least excited to most excited about, I have Arcane Proxy here. This is one of the prototype cards. It is 7 generic mana for a 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Arcane Proxy's power from your graveyard. Copy that card. You may cast that copy without paying its mana cost. So ETB, you get to cast a thing for free from your graveyard, instant or sorcery. Its prototype cost is 1 blue for a 2/1, and that's really the relevant text here. I think it's very rare. Any deck in my cube is going to be paying 7 generic mana for this effect. The decks that can ramp that way are going to be green decks. They're not likely to have a lot of targets for this thing anyway. I don't see you putting it in your deck. So really, this is a 3-drop that lets you cast a 1 or 2 mana instant or sorcery when it ETBs. And the obvious comparison here for me is to Seagate Stormcaller, which is a card that overperformed relative to my expectations. And so, honestly, when I first look at this, I'm like, it feels kind of clunky. It's got all this extra text. It's probably almost never going to be relevant in my environment. Is it really that good? And what kind of pushed me over the edge into actually testing it is how I underestimated Seagate Stormcaller when it was first spoiled.
I think that's a good comparison because I think, immediately people want to go to Snapcaster Mage with this card, but
Snapcaster Mage, it is not.
Flash, so you're not getting back counter spells. It really is just doing proactive stuff for the most part. So yeah, I think that's a reasonable comparison, and I think it is difficult to evaluate because it does have a lot going on, so I think this is a good one to try out and see how it works.
Yeah, and what made Seagate Stormcaller so good was really just kind of 2 different play patterns. One was turn 3 double Thoughtseize or double Hand Hate spell was very, very good. And the other was, if you were trying to stabilize against an aggro deck, the turn 3 double shock or turn 3 double forked bolt was kind of devastating and really difficult for anyone to come back from. And this will have the similar play patterns, except you get to play the card earlier. You get to do the turn 1 Thoughtseize and then still do the turn 3 Thoughtseize and not have to wait to hold it up, so it doesn't have the same effect on your sequencing decisions. It could be quite good. I'd be even more excited about it if it wasn't a prototype, didn't have all this extra text, and had one other little tiny upside instead. If it just had, I don't know, Vigilance or something. There's not blue cards at Vigilance, but if it had any little trinket keyword as opposed to having all this extra modality in the 7-drop version, I'd be more happy with it. As is, I feel like it's maybe a little bit clunky for the effect you're actually going to get on it in the Bun Magic Cube. All right, next up is Titania's Command. This is the green command. I think it's making a lot of waves amongst power-motivated cube designers. It is 4 green for a sorcery. Choose 2. Exile target player's graveyard. You gain 1 life for each card exiled this way. Option 2, search your library for up to 2 land cards. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Option 3 is create 2/2 green bear creature tokens. And the 4th mode is put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. So the fail case here is 6 mana, 2 4/4s, right? You make the 2 tokens, put 2 +1/+1 counters on them, and that's if you're on an empty board where the other 2 modes are not important to you, which I think is going to be pretty rare. I think you're oftentimes going to have some other kind of board established, and you're going to be putting counters on other creatures. What pushed me over into actually maybe testing this in the Bun Magic Cube is the idea of just getting Field of the Dead and another land, and turning on your Field of the Dead, or maybe you already have Field of the Dead in play, and you get 2 more lands with 2 different names.
You get to put 2 counters on them.
Yeah, so you basically get 3 modes for free, right? You basically also got the tokens because you got them off Field of the Dead. It's a 6 mana sorcery. I don't like that.
It's a little unusual for your environment.
I don't like that. But as far as ramp payoffs in green, I think it is more interesting than a lot of the other options you would have. I do have Primeval Titan in my cube, for example. There's no way to cheat it out. Well, technically there is, but I've never seen anyone do it. I don't have a Reanimator deck, but there is Reanimate in exactly black, and I guess you could figure out some way to get Primeval Titan in your graveyard and technically reanimate it. I've never seen anyone do it in this era of the cube. So really, you're just casting Primeval Titan. This is pretty similar. This is kind of like Primeval Titan, but instead of the more sort of Baneslayer-y 6/6 with Trample, you get some other creatures with tokens on them, which is a little more safe. The other thing is, I don't hate the idea of having some more optional Grave Hate in this cube, because there are so many decks that care about having a big graveyard to delve things away, that care about Delirium, that just care about their graveyard in some sort of tangential sense, that being able to exile it might be really relevant in some cases. I don't love the life gain there either, though. I gotta be honest.
The life gain, it's every single card, so that could be really swingy.
Yeah, so it does have the potential to be very swingy. Like, I'm imagining this is the kind of card that you'll be an aggro deck, and your opponent will just play it, and you're just like, oh, I can't win now, because now you have...
I gain 12 life and...
Make 2 more creatures.
2/2s.
Or, make my creatures that were, going to trade with yours in combat all just way bigger than yours. So, I don't know. It's interesting enough to have piqued my interest. I want to try it out, but I have so little room for 6 mana sorceries that it's not very high on my list.
This is definitely the kind of card that I don't love in lower powered environments or, even in limited, just because not only is it powerful, but it's powerful in a really, really swingy way. But I think, when we put this into the context of your cube where there's just a lot of other powerful stuff going on, that swinginess isn't necessarily going to be as much of an issue. And there is a real cost just to putting 6 mana sorcery in your deck there.
I mean, I really have basically no 6 mana spells. I've got Primeval Titan. I've got Crater Hoof Behemoth, which is in there still as just like a one-of card that alone makes the big ramp deck a thing that people are excited to play. Beyond that, I have nothing else you need 6 mana to cast. So there really is very limited space for this kind of effect. I really love being very picky about my ramp payoffs because there are so many 6 mana cards that just win the game on the spot, right? That's the nature of 6 mana cards. There are a lot of powerful 6 mana cards out there. I could run whatever ones I wanted. I've landed right now on my big ramp payoffs being Crater of Behemoth still, because it does make a whole deck exist just by itself. Primeval Titan, because it is so cool with Field of the Dead specifically, and also makes the land stuff work really well. And then I also really like Titania. It's a 5 mana spell, not a 6 mana spell, but that's another kind of Titania and Nissa are there to sort of, I would say those 4 cards are kind of like the big green ramp payoffs, and where this fits in there, I don't know. So on the list, but again, these are all rated below 2 for me so far. I'm still could take or leave them.
Reasonable. I mean, we got a lot of Magic cards to work with these days.
I also feel like I better understand the kind of card my cube wants these days, and so I'm much more easily able to identify a card that in the past I'd be like, this card is good, I want to try it, and now I'm just like, actually no, I'm not going to touch that for reasons.
Totally.
I got 2 cards left. These ones I am a little more excited about, though this next one not without reservation. The next one here is Third Path Iconoclast. It is a blue and a red for a creature human monk. It is a 2/1, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So basically, you add a blue to your Young Pyromancer, and you get some different type lines on your tokens, and you get triggers on all non-creature spells instead of just instants and sorceries. This card is obviously very good in my cube. I think it's going to be very powerful. There's no question that it's going to fit neatly into archetypes that I already support. If anything, I feel like I'm being a little bit pandered to. Here's a card that Andes would like. It's like if you've got the different archetypes.
A lot of people are seeing that about this card.
If you got exactly. It's like it's a certain kind of spiky Johnny or whatever. Like this is the kind of card they love. I'm currently really happy with my spells matter payoffs. I like Young Pyromancer a lot. I really like Sprite Dragon as a thing that is similar to, but very different than Young Pyromancer. Similar to in the sense that it goes in similar decks, but very different from in the sense that it is a huge threat instead of a bunch of small threats. This doesn't actually really bring anything new to the table, right? It's a little more pushed. Young Pyromancer is probably played in blue-red maybe 75% of the time in my cube. Occasionally you see it in red-black or a 3-color deck, but it's almost a gold card already, and this is just strictly a gold card. So I feel like it's kind of occupying this space where it's like, are you really bringing anything new to my cube? Are you actually doing something exciting and interesting, or are you just redundancy for this effect? And the reason I put it more highly than I would have put it otherwise is because I did end up much more excited about Electrostatic Infantry, which was the card from Dominaria United that is similar to Sprite Dragon, but a little worse, but in mono red. And that ended up being a card I was really excited about, even though it's so similar to it. So ultimately, I'll probably end up liking this card, I would guess. But it's not like I saw it and I was like, the red-blue spells matter payoff I've always wanted, because I already have so many I love. So it's like, do I need another one? I don't know. I guess this will go in.
I'm surprised you're so hesitant about it, but yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a very cool card. I'm especially curious about the fact that it makes artifact tokens. I don't know if that's super relevant to Bun Magic Cube, but in a lot of other contexts, that is going to be relevant, and I think in a positive way. I think more important, this triggering off of baubles and equipment and other things that you might also want to be playing in those kinds of decks.
Yeah.
Planeswalkers is going to matter a lot. I mean, you play this, then follow up Saheeli, like that's a lot of power.
I don't have a Saheeli in my cube. What are you talking about?
Okay, well, cool. This is the Saheeli for your cube. Great.
It's funny because I do definitely feel like I'm riding this line of I'm getting better and better, I think, just through practice and through blunt force at making my cube represent the kind of play patterns that I enjoy. But I don't want to lose the range, right? I don't want it to be just the kinds of games that I enjoy and with no other edges to it. I want there to be some depth to the cube. And ultimately, I am not breaking singleton on anything but lands, but I'm functionally breaking singleton on a lot of things. Like, I have so many 1-mana card selection spells. And are they different? Yes, technically, but they fill the exact same role in decks most of the time. And if I just go deep on young pyromancers of various sorts, then how much am I really just taking away autonomy from my drafters and saying, like, this is all you get to do in this color pair if you want to draft this color pair? I don't want the cube to lose that depth.
Totally. And I do appreciate that difference between, you'll put young pyromancer and you'll put Sprite Dragon in the same deck, but game to game, you'll have very different looking games with different decisions to make.
I can also imagine a certain deck where you get to pack 3 and in your pick 1, you have those 2 options. You might strongly prefer one or the other, depending on what the rest of your blue-red deck looks like. So they are very different cards, and that's why I love Sprite Dragon so much. I'd like Sprite Dragon a lot more than Third Path Iconoclast. I wouldn't if Young Pyromancer didn't exist, but it does. So I really like Sprite Dragon a lot more, I think. But it fits the goals of my cube so nicely that I can't not put it in and give it a shot, and I can always decide that I want to commit harder to diversity and start culling some cards that are functionally very similar in the future if I want to. All right, the card I'm most excited about for the Bun Magic Cube is maybe a little boring to a lot of people. It's Soul Partition. It's 1 and a white for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent for as long as that card remains exiled. Its owner may play it. A spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast. I think this card's great. I love it so much. I think it's really, really cool. It's very reminiscent to me of Fateful Absence, which is also 1 and a white. It's also an instant. It destroys the thing instead of exiling it, and its only creatures are planeswalkers. And instead of allowing them to recast a spell from exile for 2 less, it gives them a clue, which is very similar in a lot of ways, right? The clue's going to draw a random card. The card you exiled is a random card in some senses. I think this is better than Fateful Absence. I think the fact that it exiles is relevant, the fact that it hits more things is relevant, and the fact that they have to spend the 2 mana and the mana value of the thing that you exiled in the same turn. With Fateful Absence, you can crack the clue on end step and then draw a big card and then cast it next turn. The fact that you have to spend that tax the same turn means that it's going to buy you a very reasonable amount of tempo. And it is ultimately a tempo-style removal spell. It's kind of like a bounce spell in that they still have access to that card, but what you can get with that time is really valuable. And I think this is a beautiful, very simple card that I'm very into.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The first thing that comes to mind when I read it is the card Suspend, which just suspends a card, but obviously it's not quite the same because even though it might come back in 2 turns, they're paying the full price and 2 more for it. So I think you're right that this is more powerful maybe than it looks. Yeah, I think that it'll function pretty well in this context because a lot of your white decks are very proactive and will be able to take advantage of that tempo.
I mean, just imagine, if you get to Soul Partition, their Young Pyromancer, they draw a 4-mana Young Pyromancer. How good is a 4-mana Young Pyromancer? Even if they do get to cast it again, it costs them 4 mana. That card is so much worse.
Yep, that's true.
Now, and I think in cubes that have a much higher curve than mine, where the games are longer and you have access to more mana, that will matter less.
Very different.
Because if you're exiling a 5-drop and now it's a 7-drop, that's not as big of a difference as taking their really important 2-drop and making it a 4-drop. You're doubling the mana cost of it. It's going to be dependent on your environment, how actually effective this is, but I'm really excited about it for my cube. I like it a lot more than Fateful Absence. I'm probably going to keep both. I'm going to get something else, I think, probably. But easy to understand rules text, doesn't make some random token, and I think the art is kind of cool and abstract, so I'm into the card. I think it's really cool. This is the one that I think I rated above a 2.5 or something. I'm actually going to keep this card, I think, for a long time. I'm
mostly just trying to figure out what's going on in the illustration here. It looks cool. It kind of looks like a big bird head to me, but it's hard to figure out the details.
So that's Bun Magic Cube. We ended up talking about it for longer than I expected to, but really there's it's Third Path Iconoclast and Soul Partition that I'm actually kind of excited about, and you heard all of the various reservations and caveats there for Third Path Iconoclast, so not as much from this set as I would expect, though it is worth noting I don't have an artifact theme. This set is all about artifacts, so a lot of the things that this set is doing are not going to appeal to my cube necessarily. All right, let's run down these maybe more, I don't want to say novelty. I feel like that's such a slight to our other kinds of environments, but maybe environments we don't spend as much time thinking super hard about. That's not even true either. Let's run down our other cubes, Anthony, and maybe try and do it a little quickly because we're going a little long here.
Let's burn through the Battlebox really quickly. So this is my Battlebox. For those of you that don't know,
my Battlebox is my Battlebox. There are many like it, but this one is mine.
It's a format where it's just a self-contained pack of cards you can pull out for quick games, get free access to a set of lands, and you're drawing from a deck of all kinds of random stuff of all kinds of colors.
And your Battlebox is very low power and it's very simple mechanically.
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea is we want to be
pull it out at the bar and just play
grizzly bears into hill giants, and maybe you get a shock,
But one thing I do really try and do is promote some graveyard stuff, because that's always fun, and rummaging and things like that, because you are trying to sort of
Here comes
pull
Scuttlemutt.
together your, not Scuttlemutt, Scrapwork Mutt.
Scrapwork Mutt, whatever.
Scuttlemutt's a whole different little robot dog. Yeah, so looting is very powerful because you're trying to make the most out of your hand and sculpt it and figure out how to assemble a plan with a bunch of random cards. So Scrapwork Mutt is, as much as I am excited about it with reservations in regular cube, it is a perfect fit for Battlebox, and I'm going to slam it in there immediately, no question.
Rummaging is better in Battlebox for sure, because you do want to get rid of cards. You have no control over what you draw, aside from casting spells that gives you some control over it. It's just a random pile of 5-color cards, so being able to have an aggressive start and then you draw like a board wipe, or you draw like a wall or something that doesn't at all contribute to your strategy, you're very happy to discard that and just draw something else.
Yeah, and I think Unearth works very well because sometimes you might also discard it to one of the many other looting and rummaging effects that are already present and just take advantage of that Unearth. Similarly, another card that a lot of people mentioned is Combat Courier, which is 1 colorless for a 1/1 artifact creature construct, and it has pay 2, sacrifice Combat Courier to draw a card. It also has Unearth for a blue. This is definitely a card that I think is pretty cool as well. It's kind of just like a divination for 5 mana with a lot of extra steps, which is pretty cool. Everybody likes to do some accounting and figure out how to pay off their Combat Courier in many installments.
Please, Anthony, it's much closer to a Think Twice.
Sure, yeah, okay, that's a better comparison. So I do like this card. I don't think I'm going to end up including it in the regular cube, but I think in the battle box, where like card advantage is very powerful, but being able to do it in a way that does take some effort, but has a lot of opportunities for you to get little extra bits of value out of it, I think is going to play pretty well.
This one to me definitely seemed as much an Anthony card as the Mutt did, because it does this simple thing, but it does it in a way that it can touch so many other kinds of effects and other kinds of cards that are going on, right? You can discard it for value. It counts as sacrificing a thing to things that care about sacrificing things. It's an artifact for things that care about artifacts. So the fact that you get all these little edges to it just gives it a lot of depth, which I know is the thing you're always seeking.
So much depth for
just a little guy.
Just a little guy.
A little guy meant to die.
Yeah, poor guy. And lastly, just to continue with this Unearth theme, Reconstructed Thopter is another Unearth card. It's 3 mana for a 2/1 flying Thopter and has Unearth from 2. So pretty simple, but I think relevant in this environment is that flying is pretty powerful. There can be some board stalls, so having some more evasion, especially a way to get some damage in the late game is relevant. So this isn't the most exciting card, but this battle box is not about exciting cards. It's about creating novel gameplay experiences.
I think that's definitely the most powerful of the 3 for the battle box.
Really?
Yeah, 2/1 flyer is great,
All right.
and 2/1 flyers is really good.
Poor dog.
Dog is cool, but this is better, I think.
Huh. All right.
I'll be more excited to draw the Thopter. I got 3 cards for the Degenerate Microcube, Anthony. None of them are slam dunks, but I think they're all potentially interesting. This is my Ultra Degenerate combo cube where you draft smaller decks. You only draft 15 card decks, which means that the most degenerate combos can be extremely consistent, and your opponents are all going to have free interaction for your degenerate combos. It's a really, truly unfair environment. Unfair magic pushed to the max. So the cards I'm most interested in here for that cube are, first, Defabricate. It's 1 and a blue for an instant that allows you to either counter an artifact or enchantment spell and exile it, or counter an activated or triggered ability. Right now I have Steel Sabotage in the Degenerate Microcube, but it's been quite good because there are a lot of artifact decks. Artifacts are really relevant in that environment for a lot of different reasons. There's a Mishra's Workshop deck, there's all kinds of prison pieces, there's things you have to answer like Ensnaring Bridge where you just need answers to artifacts. So Steel Sabotage is just a bounce spell or a counter spell for an artifact for 1 blue mana. The jump from 1 mana to 2 mana is always big, but it's extra huge in the Degenerate Microcube because there are strategies that are playing spheres and thorns and other things to make your spells more expensive, and so 2 mana is a lot different. But exiling the thing that you counter is huge. That makes a huge difference because so many of those decks reuse their graveyard for value. And I think sometimes countering an activated or triggered ability is going to be game-defining. I'm thinking about like the person that flashes in their Worldspine Worm. You can't counter that spell, but you sure can counter the triggered ability when it dies to make all those worm tokens, and then they just don't get any. I think it's going to hinge on how relevant that second ability is, and I'm not sure. I have to look through the list and maybe think a little bit harder about it. Maybe just test some games with it because I think it could potentially be good enough to see play there.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how interaction changes, and even fairly narrow interaction, if it's really efficient or deals with very specific kinds of threat, threats can really matter in that context.
Yeah, like I don't think a Stifle's good in that environment. It will sometimes be great, but I don't think it's good enough to main deck, and it would be a rare kind of sideboard card. This card, I think, between the two modes, maybe you can find something in almost any deck you're going to be matched up against. You'll be happy to main deck this. I'm not sure. Again, I got to think about it a little harder, but it's definitely something that did jump off the page at me for the Degenerate Microcube. Similarly, another kind of maybe unsuspecting card that I think could also totally hang there is Ashnod's Harvester. It's 2 mana for an artifact creature construct. It is a 3/1. Whenever it attacks, exile target card from a graveyard, and it has Unearth for 1 and a black. Grave Hate is good here. Artifact creatures are good here. You can play this in a Mishra's Workshop deck and cast it on turn 1 along with something else very easily, so its mana cost is kind of trivial and irrelevant. It's kind of boring, but it fits this nice spot, kind of like the Mutt in your regular cube. This is not going to be a high pick, certainly, but it fits this spot that I've been trying to find something for a long time that was a combination of Grave Hate and like a threat that could end the game, especially on an empty board. And this does both those things. The Unearth, not irrelevant, so I think that one's actually maybe a little more likely to stick than Defabricate. The last one here, not super optimistic about, but it's spicy enough that I have to mention it. Portal to Phyrexia is 9 generic mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. This cube has Tinker as a deck. It has Channel as a way to cheat this thing out. It's got Goblin Welder as a way to cheat this thing out, and looping this with Goblin Welder is particularly disgusting. Your opponent, I assume, can do nothing if you're making them sacrifice 3 creatures every single turn at instant speed with Goblin Welder, so it's really appealing in those spots. I don't know if you can afford a 9-mana card that kind of hinges on your opponent's deck doing something in order to work. If your opponent is playing Flash Worm, for example, that Whirlspite Worm is never going to be in their graveyard. It can't be in the graveyard. That's how that card works. And so you're never going to be able to steal it with Portal Phyrexia. You can make them sacrifice the worms they got off of it, and then it's like a really complicated balance or board wipe or something. Most importantly, you're not just going to channel this out on turn 1 if you're on the play. You're not going to be excited to cheat this out really early. It's like a reactive cheat target, and I don't know how it's going to work. It is kind of cool with show and tell. If you assume your opponent's going to put in a...
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
If you assume your opponent's going to put in a creature, then they just immediately sacrifice it, and then maybe you get it at the beginning of your upkeep, which would be kind of sick. I don't know. It's maybe a little narrow, but it's cool, it's splashy, and this cube has plenty of ways to put it in play without having to pay 9 mana, so definitely something that could work there.
Yeah, I mean, it's splashy enough that you're definitely going to get that playtest experience quickly. Like, your players are going to take this and try and do stuff with it, which I can't necessarily say the same thing about some of the cards that I get excited about, so...
I'm not entirely sure. Like, it's splashy, but also it's riskier than other things you can do with Goblin Welder, Tinker, Show and Tell. This is an abnormally high number of hits for the Degenerate Microcube, but, that is an environment that definitely cares about the graveyard and definitely cares about artifacts. So, in some ways, it's not surprising that a couple of these ended up being good enough to potentially see play there. Bring us on home with, I assume, Le Turbo Cube?
The Turbo Cube.
That is French for the Turbo Cube!
Oh, great. I had no idea you spoke French.
Oh!
So, the Turbo Cube is a very special normal cube where all spells and activated abilities cost 2 generic mana less to cast, and it's leading into doing all the broken, silly stuff.
Except for the most broken, silly stuff.
It's the reasonable stuff. So, this varies very much from set to set, whether or not they print a whole bunch of dinky 2-mana artifacts that all work perfectly, or there's nothing at all. Here, we're kind of in between.
Levitating Statue.
Okay, let's talk about Levitating Statue first. So, Levitating Statue is...
0 mana for an artifact.
0 mana. Whenever you do another 0 mana thing, you put a 1/1 counter on it, and you can pay 0 mana. It becomes a huge creature.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, I have to. If I'm playing things like Stuffed Bear and stuff that are just like 0 mana 4/4s, this is going to be better than a Stuffed Bear.
This is so cool. It's good. It's not broken. It's not like it's going to ruin any of the balance of the Turbo Cube, but it's like a really cool win condition, I think. And the fact that you can... This is the kind of thing that would encourage me to actually start looking at maybe playing board wipes, like something that I can have that's a threat that I can leave as a non-creature,
okay.
and then So I think this is the card I'm most excited about. I didn't look at this whole list with the Turbo Cube in mind, but that one definitely I was immediately like, oh yeah, that's Turbo Cube gold right there, and not in a broken way. I think it's just a really cool card that will be another win condition for the decks that are just spitting out a bunch of artifacts, which is most decks.
Perfect. Sticking with artifacts, I'm curious about the Stasis Coffin. This is a legendary artifact for 3 mana, 2 Sorry, it costs 1 in the Turbo Cube, and you can pay 0 in the Turbo Cube, exile Stasis Coffin, and you gain protection from everything until your next turn. Do you think it's going to be worth it? I think it's definitely worth a try, but do you think it's going to be worth playing this? It gives you protection from certain combos. It gives you protection from the Aetherflux Reservoir and some of the mill cards, but only for a turn, which is, often half of a game, so that's pretty cool.
I wouldn't have flagged this one initially, but I think it's actually probably pretty good. It's the kind of card that I don't see myself main decking, and then I would side it in every single match because I would say, actually, this does a thing here.
I can really empathize with that experience.
And then it's like, I probably should just be main decking that, even though you look at it and you assume it's narrow. But yeah, I mean, the opportunity cost is really low here. There's a lot of things that care about you just having cheap artifacts. So if this is going to proc your Levitating Statue and proc your Psy and proc your Monastery Mentor and do all that other stuff for 1 mana, it might be good enough.
When I'm reading it, I'm like, well, it's not that great because your opponent knows you have it. So they're just going to wait until next turn before they try and shoot you with the reservoir. But
what next turn?
What are they going to do next turn? Like,
they have to do it twice.
Whatever
they're going to do, they have to do it twice.
Right. So, I think that's pretty interesting and plays in a very different axis against a lot of the most degenerate kind of combo decks in that environment. So, yeah, I'm actually talking myself up on this.
I think it's definitely worth testing. I have a clear idea of what Levitating Statue is going to do. I don't quite know what this is going to do yet, but it seems...
Let's find out.
I like the idea of there being better protective or reactive stuff in the Turbo Cube, because right now it feels like the best thing to do is just run over your opponent with proactive things. And so giving me an appealing reason to play stuff that cares about what my opponent is doing and stops their thing, I think is a plus.
So this next one kind of surprised me. I totally missed this on my first read through of the set, but they just printed Reclamation Sage in white. Did you notice that?
I did notice this, actually.
So we have Loran of the Third Path. It's just 2 and a white for a 2/1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment when it enters the battlefield. It also has Vigilance and tap it to have you and our target opponent draw a card. So there's a whole bunch of extra stuff going on here I don't totally get, but Reclamation Sage is already in this environment and reasonable, and I think it's actually going to be even more relevant in white decks in this context. So I think that this is a pretty easy include. Yeah, I mean, it's a C. It's not something super spicy, but I think that, do you think I should cut Reclamation Sage?
No.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that deck has just broke my heart too many times, but I don't think you're supposed to cut him. Those are good cards.
Yeah. All right, lastly, except maybe for one honorable mention, Tocasia's Welcome. This is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever one or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card, but it does only trigger once a turn.
Blech.
I started out really high on this when I was thinking about the Turbo Cube. There are potentially, slower white Hate Bears deck that can really take advantage of this, but there are already things like Bygone Bishop, which don't have that limitation of once per turn. So I think I'm talking myself out of this. Like, I think
I'm
that
not
the
into this
card
at all.
has some relevance if you can force the game to be slow, but if it's only just going to pay for itself in terms of cards, I'm just deleting this. Never mind. Bye.
Sick.
It's good to have this talk. These are so helpful.
Are there combos in this cube with Meticulous Excavation? This is a 1 white mana enchantment that has an activated ability for 2 and a white. So in this cube, just a white mana. You can return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. And there's other stuff there, but you can just bounce a thing for a white mana. There's got to be stuff that ETBs and makes more than 1 white mana, right?
Great question. Not off the top of my head. Most things do have to get sacrificed to...
Something ETBs and makes a
generate.
treasure token or something. I wonder if there's combos there. I don't think it's worth including because of some narrow combo that I'm trying to gin up. I'm just wondering if it's a thing.
This card is also hilarious to me because specifically it's worded, it bounces an artifact back to your hand. If it has Unearth, instead you exile it and then return it to your hand, which is just such a weird way to sidestep the fact that they say
you can actually
pick up a
thing that you unearth this turn. You can actually put it back in your hand and not have it lose to the unearthed static.
The rules nuance there is hilarious to me. I kind of love it. All right, and then I will honorably mention that maybe I will just put Combat Courier in the Turbo Cube as well. The floor is so low that it does just cycle for free, and then maybe
floor is so high.
That's what I mean. Yeah, we like high floors here. It's definitely not super exciting or doesn't do a whole lot.
I think it's pretty exciting. I mean, it cycles for free the first time, and then it becomes 1 blue mana to draw another card. So it's like it's a divination for real.
That's true, actually.
It's an actual divination with all the artifact synergies, with all the sacrifice synergies, with all the other stuff going on. So I think it's actually pretty exciting here.
All right, so that's pretty likely to make it in as well. And that's what I got for the Turbo Cube.
Levitating Statue is the one I'm most excited about by far. I think it's going to be so sick. I guess I'm a little surprised. Well, no. Am I surprised you didn't put Scrapwork Mutt in this cube too?
It would be fine, but worse than in the other contexts. Like, I don't think you would want to play it often.
I'm oftentimes pretty happy to rummage in this cube because you draw a bunch of cards, so oftentimes you start a turn and you don't know where that turn's going, and so you don't have the ability to plan a whole lot because who knows what 7 cards you're going to draw off of all the cantrips and stuff in your hand. And so often you have to play a certain number of lands to have your land on turn 1, but then you don't need your 3rd land almost ever in this cube. So I think rummaging away a land is a pretty free. So this to me almost reads very similar to Combat Courier, where it just makes a 2/1 that essentially draws a card and has unearthed flavor text, and maybe you care about discarding stuff. I don't know. I'm just surprised.
You might be talking me into it.
I literally thought you were going to put that card in every cube. I thought you were. I thought you were being serious about it.
I don't necessarily want to put it in every single cube, but I mean, that's the thing about that card is it's not like, oh, this is like super splashy and flavorful and resonates with stuff I love about Magic. It's just like this card makes a lot of sense in a lot of places, and it's just like does so much for how much text it has on it.
You need a new card to be known for. I feel like we had the earliest days of the podcast. You were known for Puppet Conjurer. And then maybe you were known for like Knight of the Reliquary and a couple other cards in there. But I feel like you need...
The White Mane Lion days.
The White Mane Lion was a more recent chapter. I feel like now you need a new card to be known for, and I think Scrapwork Mutt is a good fit. I'm imagining some parallel world now where we have
dies to a sapling.
We have Secret Lair Anthony Maddox, and it's a bag of holding, it's a White Mane Lion, it's a Scrapwork Mutt, it's a Puppet Conjurer, and what's your 5th card in
just a Sapperling token.
Sapperling token, exactly, a great Sapperling token.
It's like none of these other cards make Sapperlings. What are you doing?
But it'd be so cool. You could pick a great artist to make art for all those cards.
It could be a homunculus Sapperling token.
There you go. That's important. Homunculus Sapperling token. That'd be fun. I'm sure that would sell well. I'm sure that would sell really, really well. All right. I think we went long, but I can't actually tell because we had some technical issues we had to deal with, so this time on this recording is not at all accurate. But either way, that's all the cards we're interested in for our respective environments. Honestly, Anthony, I think that this set, the community set review is going to be a lot more exciting than our own environment review because
there are a lot of people that have cubes that are going to be really, really interested in this set.
There's a lot of cards I'm interested to talk about that they're not getting anywhere near my cubes. So I'm excited to talk about those cards in the community set review. As a reminder, go fill out that community survey at luckypaper.co/survey/bro. Anthony has made it as easy as possible to fill out this survey. If you've already updated your cube on Cube Cobra and you paste the link, it will automatically put all the cards from the latest set in there. It will show you when there's a rarity shift. You can filter things out. It's great. It could do all the things you want it to do. It's a really good way to look at the set and to figure out what you're going to test from it. So fill that out. We're also accepting hot takes for the Brothers' War. So if you have a opinion about a card, theme, mechanic that you want to be heard on the show, you can record a little voice memo on your phone and send it to mail@luckypaper.co, or you can drop it to me in Discord or on Twitter DMs. Any of the places that I am, you can send it to me there, and we will include it in our community set review episode, unless, you say something dumb.
Hasn't happened yet, but somebody's going to say something dumb.
You don't know that. You don't know that I've included everything I've been sent. I think I have. I'm pretty sure I haven't cut one that people have sent yet. But I reserve the right to not definitely include it. But I most likely will if you send that voice memo in.
We didn't choose a lot of cards from this set for our particular cubes, but I'll be honest, I did create a new section while I was going through the set for a new Untitled Cube project that has 19 cards in it already. So
cards that you like that you'd love to put in a cube.
Exactly.
That's how pretty much all cubes start for me too. It's like, I want to play this card somewhere, and how do I make a place for that to happen? And so I agree. This set is very cool, just not a perfect fit for my cube or your cubes. Though maybe we get to play with Phyrexian Portal, if it's a Degenerate Microcube. It will be fun. Portal to Phyrexia. It would be fun to actually get to use that card. The idea of show and telling it in is a delight to me. Anything else, Anthony?
Nothing else.
Great. Then that is it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you for tuning in. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. The Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by Anthony and I thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Thanks for making the show with me, Anthony.
Thank you for making the show with me.
What you got going on over there? Is Sadie tangling up in your
Sadie's hanging
in
off
your
the cords,
headphone
and I had
cable?
a little No, just
Sadie, you know the rule. If you're going to be down here
digestive
during recording,
moment.
you can't get tangled up in the
There we
cables
go.
under
Cables
the table.
out of the way.
Okay, great.